The Kinese machine. I met the young professor approximately 1 year ago through Mr. Assman's introduction.
Hold it!
So you're already acquainted with Mr. Assman himself? Not really. By chance, I'd seen his name mentioned in the papers, that's all. But I had no interest in his private affairs. If he was an unscrupulous investor, it was no concern of mine. As long as people pay their bills, I take up my tools and construct what they ask for. Warte mal ganz kurz, ich hatte ja gesagt, dass der Assman vielleicht der Professor sein könnte. Oh, die Assman hieß er, ne? Und hier der Name. Oh, warte. Oh mein Gott, die Steuerung. Beziehungsweise meine Unfähigkeit. Okay, wie viele Sterne sind das? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, und O.D. Assman. O-D-I-E A-S-M-A-N. Okay, sind 9. Aber mit einem Leerzeichen dazwischen wären es 10. Who knows? I'm just saying, ne? As long as people pay their bills, I take up my tools and construct what they ask for. So why did Mr. Assman approach you in particular then? Who can say? I presume because my name is associated with excellence in engineering. Not to mention excellence in fraud. Hard to gauge, but the point is, all I did was construct the machine according to the blueprints I was given. In other words, the Kinese machine was built on solid scientific principles. Yes, you might say that. Professor Hairbrain certainly has a mind like no other. He provided me with the blueprint and I constructed the machine to its precise specification. It was no trick. Hat die Blueprints doch auch verbrannt, oder nicht? Oder wollte sie verbrennen? Also auf jeden Fall waren die angekokelt. It's clear that you have both scientific knowledge and knowledge of conjuring magic. However, the more knowledge you have, the better equipped you are to handle whatever comes along. But your implication is that I furnish the machine with some trickery, I think. It's a possibility that we have to explore. Unfortunately though, the machine has been blown to Kingdom Come. So there's really nothing left to explore. Is there? It appears that the Kinese machine was fitted with a timed explosive device of some kind. And there's nothing left of that device either, not a single shred of evidence remaining, I hear. He must have planned all this from the outset. But in any case, it's abundantly clear that the experiment couldn't have been a trick. If the whole show was a fraud, it would have required a body double. Tell me, did the victim have a twin? That statement is kinda sus, würde ich sagen. Of course, that's it. Mr. Assman was a twin.
Objection!
Perhaps my learned friend wasn't listening earlier. Mr. Assman had no twin sibling. No, I heard you before, but the thread of hope hadn't quite left me. The demonstration could have been a trick if there was somebody who looked sufficiently like the victim. But Dr. Saiz absolutely rules that out as a possibility. It is beyond question that the victim himself, Mr. Assman, did move from the stage of the Crystal Tower. The fingerprints found at the scene attest to the fact. So it can't have been orchestrated using someone who looked identical to Mr. Assman then. What are you thinking, Mr. Naruhodo? Oh, no, nothing. Just that the idea of someone who looked identical to the victim is playing on my mind. All the spectators saw the birdcage appear above their heads and then crash headfirst into the Crystal Tower.
Hold it!
It crashed headfirst, you say? According to the many witnesses reports from those that there at the time, yes. Were you not there at the exhibition grounds on the day? Unlikely. I rarely leave my workshop. Yet another of your unique inventions was found at the scene. Well. Well, it was the unveiling of a machine I'd labored over for many months. I saw it clearly with my own eyes, the birdcage plummeting headfirst into the tower. What a surprise. I believe the victim's neck was broken from the headlong fall, wasn't it? How would you have combined that information? Even an infernal recluse like me reads the newspapers, you know? According to the reports, 2 injuries were apparent on the victim's body. Yes, he'd been stabbed in the chest by a screwdriver, believed to belong to the defendant. And he had a broken vertebrae as a result of a fall from a considerable height. Correct, my learned friend has been doing his research, it seems. Do we know which injury was the fatal one? Sadly not. Forensic science is not yet at a level where such things can be determined. What we do know is that the victim died having sustained both injuries at some point during the experiment, and since he was found in the birdcage with his neck broken. It's obvious that he fell from a considerable height. I suppose that's hard to deny. A terrible accident, I grant you. Perhaps the science on which the machine was built was flawed somehow.
Hold it!
So you understood the science, did you? Not in the slightest. Oh, right. As I've said a number of times, I'm an engineer. My job is to manufacture according to the blueprints I'm given. I would be inviting manifold problems if I foolishly allowed my brain to digest the idea behind them. I could be accused of stealing those ideas, for example. But how is it possible to construct a machine without really understanding the principles it relies on? Well, you're practicing law without really understanding the principle it relies on, aren't you? A very good point. Stand up for yourself, Mr. Naruhodo. The point is, the experiment resulted in instantaneous kinesis taking place. As such, the science must be sound. Yes, and really, experimental results are all that matters when it comes to proving a hypothesis. He's certainly very sure of himself. What do you think, Mr. Naruhodo? Well, now that the machine has been completely destroyed by yesterday's explosion, it's going to be impossible to argue its authenticity on one way or another. But if we are unable to establish that it was a piece of stage trickery rather than genuine science, we will have no grounds on which to demonstrate Professor Harebrain's innocence. Both Mr. Aspen and this man in the stand tricked the professor and used him. They took advantage of his naivety and his unbending belief in his work, and they won't let them get away with it. And seeing as the professor is an old friend of Lord Van Ziek's, what on earth must he be feeling towards Drebber? Okay, also brauchen wir wohl Beweise. Ich speichere mal. Okay. Provide me with a blueprint and construct the machine onto its precise specification. It was no trick. The whole showed it was a fraud. Body double. Tell me, did the victim have a twin? Maybe, würde ich sagen. Das wird bestimmt nicht sein.
Objection!
Siehst du, the defense would have to object to that last statement, my lord. Okay, load. Zack, zack. met the young professor approximately 1 year ago through Mr. Assman's introduction. He provided me with the blueprints and I constructed the machine to its precise specifications. It was no trick. Was zeigt das hier nicht, dass es ein Trick ist vielleicht?
Objection.
Auch nicht, okay. That last thing would seem to be at odds somehow with the evidence. Okay. Auch nicht. Gehen wir das Schritt für Schritt durch. Blah blah. With the blueprint and construct the machine to its precise specification. It was no trick. Okay. Haben wir da irgendwas? The wooden cage that was used for the demonstration crashed down with the victim inside in the crystal tower, causing damage to its base. Camera. Lens is extended, dark thinning is visible on the bellows. Science trophy. So what if what? They could have a body double. Have a twin. All the spectators saw the birdcage appear above the head and then crash head first. Head first! Ah, okay. Head first. Ja gut, das ist ja nicht head first. Der Head ist ja da und der Schaden ist ja hier. Okay.
Objection.
We've examined the birdcage that crashed into the crystal tower ourselves. As you can see, the cage, which is a wooden construction, has sustained damage in one particular spot. Following the explosion, it fell some 30 feet into the glass of the crystal tower. That level of damage is to be expected, surely. I agree, the damage itself is entirely understandable. What doesn't make sense is the location of that damage. All the breakages in the wood are the base of this birdcage, not the top. What are you saying? That's the opposite of where they should be. That's right, my lord. The birdcage that was at the scene is damaged at its base. So we have reports of the birdcage falling headlong into the crystal tower, yet the damage is at the bottom. The only way to reconcile these two facts is to accept that there were two birdcages in play that day, which were at some point switched. Switched during what wasn't a scientific experiment at all, but an elaborate piece of stage trickery. Gah! Good gracious, explain yourself, witness. Well, if we examine the facts, there's only one logical conclusion we can draw. The damage on the base of the birdcage clearly indicates that it crashed tail first into the tower.
Objection!
Es ist tail first runtergefallen von der Konstruktion, von der Maschine. But multiple witness reports claim it fell head first. The birdcage materialized in the sky next to a balloon flying over the stage, following a spontaneous explosion, at an altitude of some 60 feet above ground level, which is approximately 18 meters. It then proceeded to fall some 30 feet into the crystal tower and the ensuing deflagration. Witness reports amid such chaos are notoriously unreliable.
Objection!
But the victim's neck was broken.
Objection!
He plummeted 30 feet inside a heavy wooden cage. However he fell, it would be unsurprising to find one or two of his vertebrae crushed. A riveting scientific analysis of events from the prosecution there. Though to be even more rigorous, you would have to say it was only one vertebra actually. He wasn't quite for long. Nur ein Wirbel? I find it hard to see what's motivating Lord Van Zieks. This witness is clearly a swindler, and one who deceived a personal friend of his. If you're going to establish this deception, do it right. Sorry? I feel like that's the undertone here. Ah yes, And there's one more point. The defense appears to have forgotten. It obviously wasn't a trick, as a certain truth very plainly demonstrates. What? It seems to me that the cross-examination had better continue until we resolve this matter. Mr. Drebber, you will amend your testimony with details of this truth. Of course, we must treat the matter scientifically after all. Ah, I nearly had him there. The Kinese clearly took place because there's nowhere else 30 feet high for the birdcage to have fallen from. Okay, das ist ja jetzt eine Lüge.
Objection!
Doch nicht! Surely something about the last statement seems odd, doesn't it? Would you care to mull over precisely what you find out about it in your return journey to Japan? I wouldn't be back to give the court an answer for about 4 months though. Rest assured, we should be happy to carry proceedings forward in your absence, Counsel. He sounds serious. I have to prove my worth before he really does send me back home. Okay. The Kinese clearly took place because there's nowhere else for the birdcage to have fallen from. Wirklich nicht. Photograph of the balloon. Wooden birdcage. Photograph of Drebber. Hä? Ich speichere jetzt, weil ich nicht noch einen Punkt verlieren möchte. Aber... Present? Vielleicht vom Ballon?
Objection!
Auch nicht. Said last statement would seem we had out somehow with the evidence, okay. Dann müssen wir das wohl erstmal pressen. The Kinese clearly took place because there's nowhere else 30 feet high for the birdcage to have fallen from.
Hold it!
What do you mean? Well, before the demonstration began, the victim was alive on stage in front of the audience. Yes, there are lots of witnesses who saw Mr. Asman on the experimentation stage. That's true. And the victim's neck broke as a result of an impact following a fall. Logically, therefore, the victim must have fallen from somewhere. The balloon that exploded was an altitude of 60 feet. The point of impact on the tower was 30 feet up. That difference of 30 feet is therefore the total distance the birdcage fell. Okay. And there's no other location from which the cage could have fallen the distance if it didn't drop out of the sky. Ergo, the victim himself must have been beamed from the stage into the sky above the crystal tower. A trenchant scientific analysis. Dear me, every time I hear it explained, it sounds increasingly plausible. Oh yes, it's all very well thought out. Certainly all the spectators on the day saw it. The birdcage plummeting 30 feet through the air, I mean. Irritatingly, yes. A terrible accident, I grant you, but the science on which... Okay. Aber hier muss doch dann irgendwas noch presented werden, oder? 30 feet high for the birdcage to have fallen. Couldn't there have been wooden birdcage? Hä? Experiment Sketch vielleicht? Oder die Armbrust?
Objection!
Okay, das war's nicht, hatte ich auch nicht gedacht. Von wo könnte ein gefallen sein? Ich habe gerade nicht einfach das falsche Beweisstück präsentiert, oder? Weil guck mal, hier, da geht's ja runter.
Objection!
Hä? Aber kann er nicht darunter gefallen sein? I don't get it. Vielleicht müssen wir das hier...
Objection!
Wir müssen tatsächlich den Sketch präsentieren. Warum das denn? This is a diagram of the experimentation stage and its surroundings. We know that somehow the birdcage appeared in mid-air before falling down into the crystal tower. A fall of about 30 feet, or 9 meters. However, if you examine the diagram carefully, you see that there's one other possible location from which the birdcage could have fallen. The same distance of 30 feet. No! Okay. Well, it appears the defense has a possible explanation to put forward. Go ahead, counsel. Yes, my lord. Of course. You will indicate the place to which you are referring on this same diagram. The alternate location from which the birdcage could have possibly have fallen the requisite 30 feet. Ja, von hier, oder? Das ist ja abgeschätzt eine ähnliche Höhe, würde ich sagen. Abgeschätzt. Ich speichere nochmal. Oh Mann. Also waren wir doch richtig, dass er die Maschine runterfallen könnte, nur wir haben das falsche Beweisstück präsentiert, wie so oft manchmal bei Ace Attorney. The place I'm referring to is here, but that's where the birdcage would have been to begin with. Which is exactly the point, my lord. Yes, the birdcage was in a machine on the stage. But what we must also consider is the height of the stage itself. Go on, counsel. It turns out that the experimentation stage was built at a considerable height above ground level. If you look at the diagram, in fact, you see it's about the same height above the ground as the balloon was above the crash site. When the experiment got underway, the machine and the birdcage were engulfed in steam. At that moment, the floor of the stage gave way, and, if we assume there to be a void underneath, this birdcage and the one seen by the audience would have fallen almost exactly the same distance. Once again, my lord, this all points to the fact that there was not one birdcage, but two!
Objection!
My learned friend has no evidence that the stage had such a contrivance in its design. Someone is responsible for the criminal destruction of the Kinese machine itself, it's true. However, the stage still stands. And take a moment to look at the photographic print of the scene following yesterday's explosion. Good lord, the metal grill that formed the floor of the machine is undone. Yes, most likely blown open by the force of the explosion that destroyed the rest of the machine. The defense calls for the space below the stage to be investigated immediately. Mr. Drebber, it was you who built the Kinese machine, which means that it was you who built the two bird cages that were used to carry out this deception. Whether Professor Hairbrain's hypothesis is sound or not make no difference, because it's the construction of this machine that matters, a machine designed to take Mr. Assman's life. And lay the blame firmly at the professor's door, something that could only have been carried out by you, Mr. Enoch Drebber. Wow!
Objection!
If my learned friend has reached the end of his wild assertions. The prosecution would like to crush the defense's argument slowly, but surely. What? Your argument fails to hold water. On 2 counts. 2. Firstly, before and after the experiment, this witness went nowhere near the Kinese machine. Every relevant member of staff from the exhibition has attested to that. And I believe members of Scotland Yard have also been on watch duty at every public experiment. In other words, Mr. Drebber had no opportunity to switch the alleged pair of bird cages.
Objection!
But I've already explained why he wouldn't have needed to. The nonsense with the crossbow. That doesn't bolster your case at all. The man who disappeared from the stage and the man who crashed into the tower are one and the same. The forensic investigation team's report is unequivocal on that point. Ah! And the second flaw in your assertion is a distinct lack of motive. Why would this man have wanted to take the victim's life? He had no reason to do so. A motive? Do I have to think of everything myself? I have here a contract provided by the witness. What contract is this, Lord Van Zieks? The contract into which Mr. Drebber entered with the victim, Mr. Assman. It reads, Mr. Drebber is to receive 30% of all remunerations from government grants or other income. 30%. Certainly very favorable contractual conditions. But there was one very important provision bolted into that clause. What provision? Mr. Drebber may only uphold this right on condition that both contracting parties are alive. Okay. Okay. Well, you wouldn't have needed to. Blah. Okay. Firstly, before and after the experiment, this witness went nowhere near the Kinese machine. Irrelevant member of staff attested to that. I've also been on watch duty at every public experiment. Blah blah. Objection. Nonsense with the crossbow that doesn't bolster your case at all. The man who disappeared from the stage and the man who crashed into the tower are one and the same. The forensic investigation, blah blah. The second flaw in your assertion is the distinct lack of motive. Contact, okay. 30% hätte er bekommen, aber nur wenn alle am Leben waren. In other words, if either of us were to die, the contract would become null and void. Weil von mit contract in which okay. Also Mr. Assman hat diesen Contract gemacht. Wenn beide am Leben sind, hätte er nur das Geld bekommen. In other words, if either of us were to die, the contract would become null and void. So you see, I had nothing to gain from Mr. Assman's death. The diametric opposite, in fact. Need I say more? The witness had neither an opportunity nor a reason to commit the alleged crime. In short, the possibility of Mr. Drebber having done as you suggest is nil. What? It seems the defense's assertion was somewhat wide of the mark. Lord Van Zieks, you will submit the contract as evidence, please. Drebber's contract has been entered into the court record. The contract between Mr. Assman and Mr. Drebber, detailing the terms by which they would profit from the Kinese experiment. It's true. Okay, bevor wir gucken, was war, jetzt gucken wir uns das erstmal an. Terms of investment. The investor, Mr. O.D. Assman, hereby enters into contract with the provider, Mr. Enoch Drebber, to fund labor and materials for the construction of a super high voltage instantaneous Kinese machine. Mr. Drebber is to receive 30% of all remunerations from government grants or other income. Mr. Drebber may only oppose this right on condition that both contracting parties are alive. Assman and Drebber. Okay. Mr. Drebber is to receive 30% of all okay. Okay. Kinese's Machine. Und wieder seine... Haben wir die Karte noch? Okay, wir haben seine Visitenkarte nicht mehr. Schade, sonst hätte man das noch vergleichen können, wie seine Unterschrift da aussah. Aber jetzt müssen wir es so hinnehmen. It's true. If Drebber had no opportunity to switch the birdcage under the stage with the one in the Crystal Tower, he couldn't have done it. And in any case, I have no idea what his motive might have been. There's one aspect of your argument that still holds true, however. There were 2 birdcages. The prosecution is unable to deny that. Ah, so I'm sure you're on the right lines, Mr. Naruhodo. And I've no doubt there are other aspects of your assertion that are undeniable truths too. Well, it would seem that the defense has no rejoinder to offer. Und was hast du gesagt? It's unable to design that, okay. Sure, you want to blah. Make note of the others, okay. Well, I must say I'm a little surprised. I came here to testify about the machine I built, and instead my reputation is defiled. But the prosecution's counter has set the record straight, I think. It's impossible that I'm the culprit.
Objection!
At the beginning of this trial, we believed that there was only one birdcage. Yet, now we know there must have been 2. In other words, there was more to the demonstration than we realized at first. I think it's abundantly clear that the same applies to the culprit. Get to the point. The stage demonstration was constructed and set up in its entirety by you, Mr. Drebber. Therefore, it's inconceivable that you had no hand in the events that transpired. So if circumstances mean it's impossible that you could have carried out the crime yourself, it points to the fact that someone else was involved. Someone else? Counsel, are you suggesting... Yes, my lord. Mr. Drebber had an accomplice.
Objection!
An accomplice, how? No. Well, then I presume you're prepared for what's to come. Now that you're accusing not only this witness, but someone else, of the most serious of crimes. Okay. If these accusations turn out to be false, then make no mistake. The prosecution will demand an equally serious punishment for your slander. Well, counsel, do you intend to pursue this course and formally accuse another party of involvement in this matter? Ich habe keine Ahnung. What do I do here? At the moment, this is little more than a hunch on my part. I don't know for sure if Drebber had an accomplice, or even if he really is the culprit here. One way or another though, I have to make my position clear. As a lawyer. So what's my stance going to be? Did Drebber have an accomplice? Or not? Puh, hat er einen Komplize oder nicht?